I'm Brian Moore, a civic and political activist in the Florida area, and today is Monday, the 30th of October, 2017. I want to comment on an issue that's very important to me. It's our liberties. I am politically and ideologically to the left, but sometimes I am critical of my colleagues on the left because of their opposition to what I think are our rights as Americans. Freedom of assembly and freedom of speech is very important. However, over the last year we've seen incidents at the University of California at Berkeley where a conservative speaker was not allowed to speak out of their concern for violence. And there were large populations of protesters either blocking or keeping, I think her name was Ann Coulter, from speaking. Then we had the event at Charlottesville in Virginia in August of this year where the alt-right obtained a legal permit to march and in support of these Confederate statues. And the counter-protesters, a number of liberal groups, confronted the people who had a right to assemble and the right to speak out, and violence ensued, and there was ultimately deaths involved. So this raised very much of a concern on my part about civil liberties being denied because people feel that the group is wrong and they're right. And then most recently at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Richard Spencer, the alt-right activist, white supremacist, KKK or neo-Nazi supporter, spoke at the university, and the president of the university was criticized for having to incur $500,000 of expenses in order to protect his right. And at the event itself, there were counter-protesters, whom I'm assuming were liberals and my fellow progressives, that shouted down Mr. Spencer. And I guess they based it on the fact that it was hate speech. And but we know that under the Constitution and as interpreted by the United States Supreme Court, even hate speech is allowed in our country. I mean, the burning of the flag is allowed in our country, even though it turns off a lot of people. And we have to protect people's rights to assemble and speak, because if we don't, then we're going to suffer the same consequences when it's our turn. I mean, case in point would be 10 or 20 years ago under President Bush, we got the Patriot Act with the Congress putting a lot of limitations on us. Now, there is a point about hate speech it might incite violence, and I think in that case there could be justification for shutting people down or denying them a right to speak. But I think that's an extreme case, and it's very hard to determine. So I want to speak out in favor of the people's rights and the alt-rights that have a constitutional right for their freedoms to be protected. And I'm critical, highly critical, of the left, liberals, progressives, Democrats, you name it, who seem to feel that they're self-righteous and that their positions are more right than the other more conservative alt-right, and as a result seem to feel that they can shut them down. That is abhorrent to the Constitution and to our democracy, and I personally am speaking out about that. And a fourth example would be, most recently there was an article in today's paper about the White Lives Matter march in Shelbyville, Tennessee, and it was canceled because the counter-protesters who doubled the number of people that were demonstrating shouted them down and blocked them from marching. So that's another example of where people had a right to march and they were denied that right. Once again, I think it's important that we protect these rights, because our time will come in the future as well, where we want our own rights protected. This is Brian Moore in Brooksville, Florida, on this Monday, the 30th of October, signing off from my blog of twopartytyranny.org. Give us a look, and we're on Twitter and Facebook as well.